Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Plastic Models by a Regular Dude, Series 2 of Plastic Models for Beginners. So, today what I want to talk about a little bit is some extra tools that you might need to add to your arsenal of tools in order to help you go a step further in what you can do building a model and detailing it, making it look a little more realistic. I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, and I'm probably only going to talk about just a few things, and then once the project starts, the next project, I will expound on different tools as they come up during the build. I've got a pretty good selection of stuff, and some of it I use rarely, so I don't want to get into talking about stuff that I may not be using for a couple of models. So let me change my camera position here, and I'll start talking a little bit about some of the extra tools that you can add to help you building models. Okay, so in the original tools for beginners, I talked about knife, cutter, tweezers, sanding sticks, glue, the different glues that I use, adhesives, cements, whatever you want to call them, and then some paint brushes. So I'm not going to talk anymore about paint brushes. These tools will serve you well in practically every kit that you build, and the only additions I could suggest right off the bat there's a couple of things. Now, number one, whenever I start building this kit, you're not going to see these too much. You're going to see these. These are made by Tamiya. They're a little bit better quality than these, in my opinion. I use these for a long time with no problems. The thing I like about this particular type is it has a little bit better cutting action. The blade, as you can see, the blade is thinner and finer, and it actually slices through the plastic a little bit better than this does. This has a tendency sometimes, especially on smaller parts, to kind of mash through the part. So you'll be seeing these, and also you will be seeing these tweezers more than these. And again, these are good tweezers, and just about any tweezers will do the job as long as they're not too cheap. But these are, as you can see, a little bit heavier metal than these, so they're a lot more rigid, less chance of squeezing too hard and splaying the end out on the points. Has a very super fine point and very sharp edges. So it really grips the parts well, especially small parts. So you'll be seeing these instead of those cutters and these tweezers more. I still use these for different things. It's just, you'll see them switch up. Knife, same thing. This is pretty much the only knife I use. I have an extra that I put different blades in for different jobs, and I'll show you what I use the different blades for as we go along. Another item I'm going to suggest that is a good thing to have are these self-closing tweezers. They're closed unless you spring them open. They're very springy, very tight, good for painting small parts, holding parts together. Work well with decals when you're doing the decals because it holds the backing paper really well. I would suggest some of those. Another thing that's pretty important, especially when you get into some brands of kits, is a pin vise. And what a pin vise is, it's a small handheld drill. Usually it has 2 or more different size collets on the ends for using different sized let's see, drill bits. Whoops, sorry. For example, this is a drill bit I use frequently because for some reason it just seems to be a common size in doing different things. Now, where these small drill bits will come in handy is if you're building, say, an older kit, You may have a, let's pretend this is a gun barrel, a machine gun barrel, or a small cannon barrel. It will be molded solid. It's just flat on the end. And what you'll want to do, just to add that little bit of realism to it, and it helps with the appearance of the kit, especially when somebody's really looking at it, is you can use this drill bit of the appropriate size to drill out the end of the barrel. That way it actually looks like a barrel, not just a solid metal rod. It's also good for hollowing out the exhaust pipes on mufflers, whether it be aircraft or, you know, armor models, armored cars, even civilian vehicles. You know, older kits all suffer from the same problems, the same limitations in the molding process. So that's something that really helps. Newer kits usually have the holes already pre-drilled, but on some newer kits, you may have options on a given kit of adding or leaving off certain details. And sometimes, like, you'll have the outside of the hull will be smooth, but on the inside, the instruction will say, if you know you're using option B or whatever, you need to drill these holes out on the inside of the vehicle, and there'll be indentations or markings so you'll know where to drill. You drill from the inside, pokes all the way through, suddenly you have 2 mounting points, or however many mounting points, for the detail for that particular option. So this is a really good thing to have. Otherwise it can be kind of tricky. Now, an old school way of drilling holes, either in the end of barrels or drilling out holes for details on a kit, is just to use your X-Acto knife. Just make sure you have a really good point. You just stick it on the end of the item you want to hollow out and just spin it around, and it will hollow the end out. It just won't do it as deeply, but it still works. So that's something else to consider. Other than that, I'm going to say some clamps. I almost forgot. Clamps are also very handy. There's different types. There's spring clamps. There are slide clamps. There are clothespins. There are alligator clips. And all these serve different purposes. I'm not going to give you a bunch of examples, but for instance, if you're doing an aircraft kit, a clamp like this or this might be handy for holding the 2 wing halves together while you're cementing or letting them dry. There's all kinds of applications, and these will be ones that I'll demonstrate as they come up whenever we start building the next kit. Paintbrushes, you know, you'll just want to have various sizes of paintbrushes. I would suggest, if you do use multiple types of paint, whether it be, you know, if you use enamels and acrylics both, have a separate set each, so you avoid cross-contamination, or else just really make sure you clean your paintbrushes really, really well. What else? Once you get into photo etch, a good item to have, and these aren't very expensive, and you can sometimes find a version of these in hardware stores or hobby shops. And what this is for bending photo etch. So photo etch is, you know, generally made of brass, sometimes nickel, and you have parts that add or enhance detail on a kit, and sometimes you need to use something like this to bend the brass. Generally they'll have seams, and you can usually bend it with your hands, but if there's a number of different bends, it's helpful to have a tool like this to help bend the brass so you get a nice crisp sharp edge. Okay, very handy. Any small plier type tool will work as long as it's non-serrated on the inside and it's got nice flat, well machined edges that line up, so you can actually use it to bend stuff without it being all wonky looking, because you can use the side and bend a long piece I did it where I were letting her, so it was all crooked. But anyway, you get the idea. So anyway, photo etch tool is a good thing to have and is very helpful on some things. Sometimes you can get away doing the whole thing without the tool because it's got the pre-scored marks in it, which make it easy. But you know, it's just something good to have since we're talking about more advanced tools. So there's that. You'll want to think about getting some type of modeling putty. There's tons on the market. I would say try a few different ones and figure out which one you like. They all behave differently. Some of them are very strong smelling, like the Tamiya. It must be a lacquer base because you use lacquer thinner to clean it, but it works really well. And then there's acrylic types. Vallejo makes a nice acrylic that I want to try at some point. I just haven't yet. But you know, some type of putty for filling seams, stuff like that. Files are a good idea. You can buy them at hobby shops. Testers makes a nice set. I think this is what this set is Testers. And looking at Testers and different brands, they look identical, so they all probably come from the same place. There's different shapes, different coarseness, so it will handle just about any job, and it's good for removing coarser, heavier material, and also helps whenever you're trying to clean up photo etch parts after you've cut them from the photo etch fret. So another tool that I'm going to recommend, especially when you get more into the painting aspect, is you always want to make sure, and I'm going to talk about this more when I get into the airbrush and painting video, which will be up next time. You need to really make sure that your paint is mixed well. And some bottles of paint, like Ammo by MIG, they come with an agitator inside, which really helps to mix the paint up. To me, it doesn't. Vallejo doesn't. Most brands don't. But a good way to do it, as long as it's not in one of these type of bottles here, if it's more in a regular screw top jar type bottle like Tamiya or Tester's Model Master, a good way to mix that up is with this tool here. This one is manufactured by Badger Airbrush, and all it is, it's a simple motor here with a battery inside, and you flip the switch and it spins this little agitator to mix the paint, and it works very well. That way you can get down deep into the bottom of the pot, get that paint really mixed up well, because if you don't, you end up using thin paint at the beginning of the jar, and the further you go, the thicker it gets because it hasn't been mixed properly, and sometimes your colors can come out looking really weird, especially with a brand like Vallejo. You can have a color, it'll say whatever color it is, but when you look at it, it doesn't look anything like what it says because it hasn't been mixed because of all the different colors of pigments in there. So this is a good item to get. You can find it at some hobby shops. You can order them online. I think I got this one for about $10. But it's well worth the money, and it just takes 2 AA batteries, and it's indispensable. It really works well for mixing up paint. So that's another suggestion. Then other things you want to make sure you have around are like toothpicks, i.e. cocktail sticks. I like the single end versions because you can use the flat end for doing other things. I'll show different uses for those. Another good item to have on hand because they're also inexpensive, and you can get them at like dollar stores here in the US, or pound stores, I think they call them in the UK, or any just cheap place, is a large container of Q-tips or cotton buds or whatever you want to call them. These have a lot of uses as well, which I will demonstrate as we go. So that just kind of gives you an idea of some of the extra stuff that you should add. And as you go along, you're going to discover that you need other things. You might discover that you don't need certain things. It's best just to, you know, watch how other people are doing things, and you know, buy your tools and your supplies accordingly. But those are just a few items that can help and can add to your arsenal of tools. Other supplies you can get: some kind of clear part cement. Model Master makes a clear part cement, good for gluing lenses and headlights, or canopies on aircraft, or, you know, landing lights on aircraft, you know, periscopes in military vehicles. It works well because it dries clear. Something else that you can use as well, I mean, some people just can get away with using good old school glue, white school glue, sometimes referred to as PVA glue, I think. That'll work as well. It's just some, like this one here. This one's called Gator's Grip. It's made here in the US, and it works really well. It's got a really good, it adheres really well, and this is good for gluing photo etch parts that don't have to set immediately, because that way you have room to move them around. Because normally on photo etch parts you would use super glue. It comes in different viscosities, you know, thin. This one's an ultra gel. It's thick. There's medium, just for different jobs. I tend to have the thin and the thick. The thick, because it's thicker, it dries a little slower, so you have time to actually move the part around and get it positioned. This stuff here, you set it in place, it's there, so you got to make sure you're really precise in the way you place it. And you know, drinking coffee beforehand, not a good idea. But this will work for photo etch as well, and because of its slow drying time, it gives you time to maneuver the piece into place and make sure it's where it needs to be. And if there's any excess, you can clean it up with water on one of these. So that's the first example of what you can use that for. All right, so that's some of the other adhesives, supplies that you can use. So I think I'm going to call it quits on that. That kind of gives you an idea of some more items you can add to your set of supplies and tools, and that way, you know, you can start building up. And, you know, just trial and error really is the best way to do it. Watch other YouTube videos, you know, just look stuff up, see how people are doing things, and find methods that work well for you. So that's it for this first video in the second series of plastic models for beginners, where we advance a little bit further in the technical aspects of building a model kit. So until next time, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. And as always, thanks for joining me on Plastic Models by Regular Dude. See you later.